The Pangaea Group is proud to be a founding sponsor of the 14th National Pharmaceutical Congress. As Canada's trusted, established, and reliable partner to pharma, Pangaea enables people to positively impact the Canadian healthcare system for the well-being and health of Canadians. Pangaea delivers on this purpose through diverse experience, an extensive network, and close partnerships that accumulate the knowledge and insights needed to effectively enable strategy for our clients. Plus, we don't just say, we also do, by helping many of our clients execute strategies across various functions. Driven by our people, the Pangaea team is sought after as a collection of efficient thought leaders and connectors from many corners of industry dedicated to providing timely, innovative, and accessible solutions for our clients. I encourage you to stop by for virtual coffee by reaching us at info@pangaeaconsultants.com or read more on our blog at pangaeaconsultants.com. Thanks to our clients for 25 years of partnership in helping you succeed. Enjoy the conference.
Good morning. It's good to be together again. Welcome to the Summer 2021 webinar edition of the National Pharmaceutical Congress. My name is Mitch Shannon. I'm the CEO of Chronicle Companies in Toronto, Canada, and I'd like to welcome you to our discussion today. Here's a question for you delegates. How many of you have had your second vaccine done? Raise your hands if you have. Jeremy, can we turn the camera around and put it on our delegates for a minute? That's wonderful. I'm glad to see our friend James Cran got his and he's feeling on top of the world. So it's now June 22nd. The curve has been more or less flattened, and soon the pharma sector will be getting ready to pick up where we left off. Or will we? There are a few points to consider before we hit reset. A couple of obvious things. The old way of doing things wasn't working that well. Certain populations were not fully included. Stakeholders were typically working across purposes. Several functions were antiquated. Many of the old ways were inefficient, expensive, and just hard to rationalize. Next, while pharma's been doing all the right things to keep it together through the pandemic, other entities have stepped up and seem to want a leadership role in the healthcare space. I'm talking about IT, telehealth, and digital health initiatives. It's not the same game anymore, not when the old boys club now has new membership applications from names like Apple, Google, Amazon. So these are some areas that our panel may touch on this morning, and I know you NPC delegates are never reluctant to throw questions at them as we count down to pharma's next phase. Once again, we've got a full house for our jam-packed agenda. More than 400 of you have registered. I'll quickly share some data about who else is in the room today. As was the case for our spring meeting, 4 out of 5 of you work in the pharma or biotech industry. The other 20% are in allied areas. And the trend continues from the spring meeting with a lot of customer-facing personnel choosing to join us this morning. Field forces, you're welcome. Here's one change from the spring. We have delegates this morning from Brazil, Colombia, Cayman Islands, Kenya, Ghana, Denmark, Czech Republic, the Netherlands, India, the UK, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, the People's Republic of China, Australia, and the USA. Hello, world. Hope to see you again in person soon. But the traditional centers of Canadian pharma activity are by far the most represented Toronto and Montreal, along with our national capital. And once again, we've got an interesting mix of folks in the early, middle, and later stages of their careers. So everyone, let's get started. Remember that if you need assistance during this meeting, just use the icon on the bottom of your screen to raise your virtual hand, and one of our Chronicle staff will come running over to assist. For questions at our faculty, fire questions at our faculty whenever you'd like by clicking on the Q&A icon on the bottom of your screen. And if by some chance you didn't get the pre-read document that was circulated, a clickable link will be on the screen throughout the webinar at various times. That will get you the agenda, faculty bios, and some background reading about the issues. I'll now turn things over to Ben Parry of Pangaea Group. Before we do that, let's take 30 seconds to acknowledge our partners in this event. They are the sponsors who make this hour possible. So Ben, stand by. I'll see you just before noon when we wrap up this conference.
Thank you to the sponsors of the NPC Summer 2021 webinar. Thanks to their support, these special events continue to be open to the Canadian life sciences community, without charge. Thanks to Chronicle Companies, Pangaea Consultants, Imprez, O'Day, Talk Communications, Healthing.ca, MReach, 3H Communications, Digital Partners, and Peak Pharma Solutions. These are your leaders, supporting the Canadian life sciences.
All right. Well, thanks, Mitch, and welcome, everyone. Great to have you join us for the NPC Summer webinar to drive the dialogue forward. We've got 3 talented panelists here today who will bring forward ideas and insights on how the post-COVID roadmap is shaping. It's a true pleasure to be able to introduce Ronnie Miller, President and CEO of Roche Pharmaceuticals Canada, Brian Canestraro, General Manager of Intercept Pharmaceuticals Canada, and Pat Forsythe, General Manager of Eisai Canada, to you today. Ronnie will be leading the charge this morning to share perspectives on how government and industry relations are shaping post-COVID. Ronnie is one of Canada's most respected thought leaders and always brings a grounded and diverse perspective on Canadian healthcare. It's a real treat to have Ronnie here with us today. Building on Ronnie's presentation, Brian will take us down the path on the emerging discussion of how external deployment in pharma is stepping into the post-COVID environment. Brian's insights run deep with his extensive experience in building pharma organizations from inception to scale with a high contribution to the health system. It's wonderful to have Brian back with us today to share his experience and passion for building the next generation of healthcare. And the roadmap wouldn't be complete without challenging ideas on the social impact and how to create a productive environment post-COVID, a concept that we've all been challenged with in this virtual environment over the past year. Pat will bring us to this discussion by speaking to the fundamentals that we will all be navigating as we go forward post-COVID. Pat is a dynamic and respected leader who contributes a great deal of his own time and experience to enrich progress in the industry and the health system as a whole. We're excited that Pat could join us today. As we often do, to set the stage for our presenters, we have a few poll questions to warm up the discussion. So I'll ask the team to bring up the first poll question and we'll get moving. So question number 1, have you ever managed your emails while on Zoom or Teams virtual call? Gasp, I would never. I do it when I have to. Occasionally I dabble. Not quite a habit yet, but yeah, you caught me. It is what it is. I'm an email machine and don't stop for anyone. Let us know your thoughts. All right, interesting. I do it when I have to seems to be the leader there. Very cool. We'll move on to the next polling question. So in your view, has the industry's response to COVID-19 helped or hindered our reputation with the federal government? The reputation of the industry is stronger now than it was. Industry's reputation is actually worse now than it was before COVID. Or reputation is about the same. Industry's COVID response will neither help nor hinder in the long run. Let us know your thoughts. Okay. Very interesting. So the reputation of the industry is stronger now than it ever has been pre-COVID. Wonderful. Thanks for that feedback. All right, we'll jump to the next one as we keep warming you up. When the health system reopens to industry, what levels of face-to-face engagement will return compared to pre-COVID? 0 to 25% of pre-COVID levels, 26 to 50, 51 to 75, 76 to 99, or 100% will go right back to where we were? Oh, very interesting. So we're kind of right in the middle there, 51 to 75%. Very good. All right, we'll bring up the last question. Will digital remote customer engagements continue to be a significant part of the promotional mix post-COVID? No, we prefer other means of promotion, not more than an occasional marketing tool. Yes, in part, but only where it's fit for purpose. Yes, we see this now as being a standard component of our promotion. Or yes, digital remote engagement is fundamentally one of the options we'll offer to interface with customers. Let's see what you have to say. Okay, a little bit of a spread there, but we've got kind of a standard component seems to be the leader there. Wonderful. Well, thanks for sharing your thoughts there, and I hope that warms you up as we get into our presentations and think about the Q&A panel that we'll have on the back end. So always interesting to see the audience perspective. I think that gives us a nice platform to get started with our speakers today. So to get us started, we will invite Ronnie to the stage. Over to you, Ronnie.
Thanks, Ben. So I'm going to share with you the perspectives on the government and industry relations post-COVID. This certainly has been an interesting period for us in the pharmaceutical or innovative medicines environment. Before COVID-19, the industry certainly had an arm's length relationship with the federal government. And despite the shared interest of delivering healthcare solutions to Canadians faster and building our life sciences sector in Canada, there has certainly been a lack of dialogue and collaboration between the industry and the government. Some would actually say a fractious relationship would be a better description. Indeed, since 2017, the government wanted to introduce pricing reforms, and we've been arm wrestling with PMPRB over those past 4 years. And of course, we know the government also wants to reduce pharmacare, and whether that is a sensible step in a population which is probably 95% covered by insurance is a debatable one. And we as an industry, we're investing all the time in new science and innovation to bring forward to help patients' lives and also save lives. But at the same time, in an environment where the government doesn't welcome innovation, then our head offices are unlikely to invest in the Canadian environment. Now, during COVID-19, the world certainly has been turned upside down. All the stakeholders, including the public, realized the importance of a strong partnership between the industry and government. We took a leadership role in diagnostics, therapies, and vaccines, and suddenly we're on speed dial, myself and many of our colleagues, on speed dial with the premiers and with the federal government. We really wanted to see if they can produce supply faster for the Canadian population. So the government became more engaged in conversation, more open, and certainly wanted to be more involved in a partnership in a way that we've not seen for the past 20 years. And we saw this relationship shift from a transactional relationship to probably an interactive relationship and lay down a baseline to go forward that I think will have a new engaged working relationship with federal government, particularly in the future. Now, during COVID-19, we've seen some remarkable investments, a complete about-face by the federal government. They've announced a $2.2 billion investment over the next 7 years in the life sciences sector. And included in that is a pan-Canadian genomic strategy worth about $400 million and an investment in artificial intelligence up to $450 million. Indeed, on top of that, my colleagues at Sanofi saw an investment in the biomanufacturing facility in North York to improve Sanofi Pasteur's site, and that will be built by 2027, of which the federal government will invest $417 million, and Ontario government will contribute a further $55 million in a project that's almost $1 billion investment. Now, this is not a magic bullet that will change the manufacturing sector overnight in Canada, but it's certainly a very, very progressive step forward. The post-COVID-19, what does this mean? Well, I think we've got a much more progressive an engaged life sciences sector, and I think a willingness to have a roundtable discussion both at provincial level and also federal level. And it starts with the industry's recognition by the government and the commitment to a long-lasting partnership. And this will lead to a more resilient healthcare system, and hopefully, ultimately, our all goals should be better outcome for patients. Now, industry and government can work together on a national life sciences sector strategy, and that should strengthen partnerships, attract investment in life sciences, foster innovation, and enhance, more importantly, Canada's international competitiveness. The industry is engaged with the healthcare system across Canada, and it's certainly looking to contribute further. And areas of interest include artificial intelligence, biomanufacturing, digital health, and health data infrastructure. So real partnership is certainly possible now in a way we could never have imagined before. And I think learnings from COVID-19 will be applied to other disease areas, particularly areas such as oncology, where a collaborative approach must be taken to tackle emerging issues due to COVID-19, such as the backlog in cancer diagnosis and treatment. And that should apply across a number of therapeutic areas. So overall, I believe that the relationship has improved, our engagement has improved, and I know in future there will be more roundtable discussions at provincial and government level to improve life sciences healthcare strategy in the long term. And to that, we should all be proud and pleased. So I'd like to pass on to a good friend and colleague, Brian Canestraro of Intercept Pharma.
I'd like to thank the organizers for the opportunity to present during today's discussion. I'm going to be speaking about post-lockdown customer engagement considerations, and this has become an increasingly important topic given the accelerated pace of vaccination that's happening across the country, and of course the turning of attention towards reopening of the economy, and of course reopening of our accessibility to the healthcare system. I wanted to start by acknowledging the significant amount of change that's been going on across the industry throughout the pandemic, largely as a result of very early efforts across industry partners to understand customers' channel preferences, to build important digital content and collateral, and importantly, do the hard work of equipping our people to build remote and digital capability. And if we look at where industry is at today compared to the early days of the pandemic, it is nothing short of transformative. And it's important to recognize that we have become really good at this. Market research that's been conducted throughout the pandemic has suggested that customers have really appreciated industry's responsiveness throughout the pandemic, our ability to create and disseminate credible medical education remotely throughout the pandemic, and of course, provide them with the tools and the materials that they have needed to support remote patient care. And in large part, that's because of the familiarity that we all have with all the names and the brands and the platforms that you see on the screen here, which have become such an important part of our day-to-day lives throughout the course of COVID. And despite the fact that we are all looking forward to seeing customers face-to-face, and we're all looking forward to opening up once again, a significant proportion of customers are going to continue to prefer accessing information remotely. 36% of customers will continue to plan to engage in remote medical education. 31% of customers will continue to see our representatives and people via video call. And 16% of customers will continue to plan to engage with us in the various forms of emails and promotional collateral that has been created, which is a really nice compliment and way of saying that customers have liked some of the newer experiences that they've had over the course of the pandemic, and a number of those experiences are expected to stay even as we contemplate reopening. Customers will also continue to access digital content out of necessity. And so while the vast majority of customers will want to re-engage with industry face-to-face, the reality is that there are some structural barriers that will get in the way of that happening as often as we would like. First, there's a significant amount of patient backlog across therapeutic areas that clinics will have to get through that will limit accessibility. And second, there have been significant shifts in practice patterns that have been born out of the telehealth experience that are here to stay. So as we think about the reopening in a post-lockdown world, it will be important for all the different member companies and industry to essentially recontract with customers to understand their evolving needs, what are their preferred channels going to be post-lockdown, and understand the mix of engagements across face-to-face video calls, webinars, and emails that will make the most sense to help them help their patients. So ultimately, what we will see is a shift to a much more customer-centered, bespoke approach to customer engagement. And this much more customer-specific approach is going to have an impact on organizational planning and execution. This will need to become much more dynamic in terms of both how we plan and how we execute. We're going to have to become very comfortable at tracking and evaluating engagement throughout different channels and throughout the customer journey and experience with our organizations. We're going to have to become much more comfortable with using non-traditional insights to guide any changes to how we're executing. And of course, we need to think about eliminating silos to ensure that the customer experience remains as continuous as possible. A more customer-centric model may continue to elevate the role of the rep. Our reps have arguably had to adapt to the most amount of change throughout the pandemic. And at the same time, the value of these roles has arguably never been more important. And I'm not going to make a statement about whether or not we need more or less reps in industry. Ultimately, those are independent company decisions based on a number of different factors. But it's fair to say that this role is going to become increasingly important as a connector between customers and companies for a number of reasons. First and foremost, our reps are uniquely positioned to understand the customer's needs better than anyone else in our companies. They sit at the center of the totality of all of our value offerings. They are well positioned to observe any changes in customer behavior and needs sooner than anyone else. And of course, in a world where increasingly digital is going to complement face-to-face activity, they're best positioned to not only capture, but to also maintain the customer's attention throughout the execution and planning lifecycle. So there will continue to be roles for reps. I think that these roles will be increasingly important, but these roles will need to be fulfilled by people that exhibit a slightly different skill set. And I think that we've seen this play out throughout COVID. These are roles that are very well suited to people who are able to adapt to and work well with technology, that have a high level of emotional intelligence, that have strong listening and communication skills, and that are very strong collaborators and problem solvers. And so while the industry attention has rightly been focused over the last number of years on market access and pricing realities, it might actually become time to revisit the value of reps and how we externally deploy field teams to ensure that the innovation that we're delivering to Canadians is much more actively introduced and adopted within the healthcare system so that patients and healthcare systems can benefit from the outcomes that we hoped would be achieved. And with that, I think I will thank you for the time today to review this important topic, and I'll look forward to the discussion to follow. In the meantime, I'm going to hand over to Pat Forsythe, the General Manager from Eisai Pharma.
Thanks, Brian. Good morning, everybody, and thanks for the opportunity to present today. I'm going to speak to you today about post-COVID productivity. And we're going to look at three different topics: health and well-being, productivity through COVID, and thoughts for a post-COVID world. And we'll look at it from two perspectives, from those of the employees and those of the customers. So what have we been through in the last 18 plus months? The human condition really has been fear, anxiety, worry, and concern. And there's tons of evidence out there that this is actually happening. Not only is mental health closely tied to social isolation, but worsening cardiovascular health is actually tied to this as well. In March 2020, at the very beginning of the COVID lockdown, people are already reporting negative mental health effects from being forced to be in a lockdown. So right from the very beginning, and we've been through 18 months of this. There's been a fourfold increase in adults reporting anxiety or depression from January to June 2019 as a baseline to January 2021, a fourfold increase. So it's real. By age group, you can see that younger people, so people less than 50 years old, people less than 65, are really predominantly the ones that are reporting all these depressive disorders through COVID. So let's shift a little bit and talk about, on that backdrop, how has that affected our productivity and the productivity of our employees? When this first hit, my first thought as somebody here working at Eisai was, oh, this is going to be really tough. How are we possibly going to get all this done when we're in a lockdown situation? And lo and behold, technology comes to the rescue. So, Zoom and Teams have really saved the day for us. There's a lot of advantages, and it's reported by all employees. So there's no commute time is the first thing they noticed. It gives them some flexibility in their schedule. Surprisingly, collaboration is possible. You can have a great meeting. You can have 10 people on the line, and you can have a discussion and exchange of ideas. It is possible, and it would not have been possible without technology. And it allows you to address other responsibilities as employees. So schools are closed, your kids are at home. You can actually kind of look after them at the same time and still get work done. So there are some definite advantages. However, there's a lot of disadvantages as well. I'm going to speak to 3: distractions, Zoom fatigue, and multitasking. But reported on a regular basis is employees feel they're trapped in a work zone 24/7. Their office is on their kitchen table and it's always there. And they're also reporting less uninterrupted work time. In other words, they don't have time to get work done because they're on these calls all day. So what does distraction look like? Well, it probably doesn't look like the girl up in the left-hand corner. It probably looks more like, these photos here. And you can see that people are largely distracted in their workplace at home. It's not always ideal. Zoom fatigue is a real thing. There's a ton of literature on this, and taking a closer look at it, I've learned that there's really 4 reasons why Zoom fatigue exists. And video calls essentially require a lot more mental processing. First of all, 65% of our communication is nonverbal. It's body language, it's your tone, it's something as simple as your pupils dilate a little bit more. Human beings are elegantly designed to pick up on these little cues, and we don't have them anymore. So it's become very difficult to really discern what is the meaning of what this person is saying. You really have to strain to listen to hear those things. It's shown also that audio delays can really be disruptive. Apparently, a millisecond delay in a verbal response negatively affects perceptions of human beings. That's just the way we're wired. And those things happen all the time on these calls, either through technology or through, I'm not going to say anything because I'm waiting for somebody else to say it. Which is phenomenon number 3, the no, you go ahead. So how many times in an hour meeting do 2 people try to speak? And because we're polite Canadians, we say, no, you go ahead. It gets frustrating after a little while. And then finally, you're always on. You cannot escape the camera. So there's evidence now to show that that little picture of that camera of you presenting takes about 10 to 15% of your focus away, because you're always kind of looking at, what do I look like on the camera? So all of those things require mental processing. And what happens is, from a productivity perspective, employees really feel exhausted at the end of the day. I'm sure all of us have felt the same way after a day of Zoom calls. There's a loss of richness of communication. You lose some of the subtleties. You lose some of the creativity and the opportunities to have those exchanges. And the informal communication channels are diminished. So running into someone in the hallway and exchanging an idea about a project, those things just are not happening organically anymore. So have we been productive? The answer is, I'd say largely yes. And, thank goodness for technology, but it's been exhausting. And I think you have to recognize it's been tough on your people. What about multitasking? So how many people have seen this? The person you're on a call with, their eyes are darting all over the screen. They're obviously reading something while someone else is presenting. Their camera gets turned off all the time. You get emails from them on topics that aren't even related to the meeting. So these are all good signs that, they're present, but they're not focused. And so what you're getting is diminished productivity. You're not getting people's best thoughts anymore. And that's just the way that it is. So from a productivity perspective for employees, Probably not ideal, definitely workable, but exhausting for employees. What about our customers? They've had a bit of a different experience. So if you look at essential versus non-essential workers, reporting mental illness, anxiety, depression, even substance abuse and suicide, it's far, far higher amongst essential workers. That is not specific to healthcare workers. So you can imagine it might even be worse for them because they've had a very different experience than we've had. If your customers are frontline, it's been tough. If they're not frontline, but they're healthcare workers, they still had a very different experience. They're seeing fewer patients, mostly telemedicine. And like everybody else, for them, Zoom fatigue is set in. It's being reported all the time that, I don't want to do Zoom calls anymore. So the big question becomes, from a customer's perspective, will they come back? Will they welcome us back after COVID? And I'll give you now some predictions for a post-COVID world. From an employee perspective, I predict that employees are going to want to come back to work, and they're craving social interaction. We're human beings, we're social animals, and they're missing that. But they're not going to want to come back 5 days a week. The Zoom team calls are going to continue to make up 20 to 60% of all your future meetings because employees still will be working from home. So we have to be ready for that. I think companies are going to have to schedule and plan focused team building and informal face-to-face communication. So take the informal and make it formal and bring some of that richness of communication back that we're missing in this two-dimensional world. And I think most companies are reporting that they're going to allow work from home, but they're going to be requiring some minimum work from office as well. There's a real range being reported out there. Each company is going to have to decide on what they want to do. From a customer perspective, I predict customers will be happy to see their industry colleagues again, even if it's just for the social interaction. However, some customers are going to decide that they don't need that interaction, or they're going to decide that they prefer to have it in a digital format. So there's going to be a blend of digital and face-to-face, and we're going to have to be good at doing both of those things. My suggestions for a post-pandemic world are as follows. From employees, you should limit these Zoom or Teams meetings to shorter timelines. In my opinion, that's only my opinion, but if you have a Zoom meeting more than 2 hours, you should rethink whether you should have it and maybe meet face-to-face. When collaboration and input is needed, when you need creativity, when you need to understand some of the subtleties of communication, you need to meet face-to-face. I would say limit meetings in general. This was pre-COVID problem as well, but we just have far too many meetings, and Zoom has made them easy to have. I think companies need to really create expectations for digital meetings. Stay present. Don't be doing emails. No multitasking. Put your cameras on and leave them on. And hide your self view on your digital calls because it's robbing you of 15% of your focus. I think we need to be far more flexible in allowing employees to build that work schedule. And I think companies will do that, but we need to be aware of that. And be aware of the added stress and be supportive of any mental health issues. All those statistics I showed at the beginning, those are your employees. And so some of them are going to come back in a very stressed out manner. And I think we need to be supportive of those things. On a customer basis, show some empathy for what your customers have been through. Some of them have been through a very different experience than we have. We've been a little insulated from it. Make sure your team always adds value. And that's really the focus on the patient. So the thing we have in common is physicians and the industry are trying to improve outcomes, improve the patient journey. And I think if we can add value there, we're going to be welcomed back. And accept that the new normal is going to be a blend, and you better have a great plan to make sure that blend is going to work. I'll give you a free tip, number 132, how to have fewer meetings. And basically, if it can be an email, do an email instead of a meeting. My final thought is this. The world's just gone through a global pandemic. I know we're a little numb to it because we see it in the news every day and it's just kind of, it's just there. But don't ever forget that it was difficult and not everybody fared well. It was a global pandemic. So my advice to everybody, and I know you would do this anyway, but be kind and be human. And with that, I will turn it back to Ben Parry. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Pat. And thanks to our panelists for their presentations today. Before we get into the QA, we're going to take a short moment to present an innovation spotlight for you from two supporters of the NPC. And that will also allow you a chance to put your Q&A questions down below. I see we have some stacking up already, but we'll give you a moment to do that as well. And then as soon as we're back from that, I'll invite our panelists to join on screen, and we'll jump into the Q&A. So here's an innovation spotlight for you.
As pharmaceutical representatives or leaders in marketing and commercial operations, your top goal is to connect with your primary customers, the healthcare professionals, in the most personalized and impactful way possible. So you need to obsess about their needs, how you can stand apart from all the noise, and how you can save them time and help them make the critical choices they make for their patients. Your challenge is, their world has changed and every customer is unique. You need precise insights that you can act on. You end up sifting through disconnected and endless data from different spreadsheets, dashboards, and that takes time. A lot of your precious time. Because data has a shelf life, you need to understand your customer's journey in real time. You need one source of truth that tells you the story. Introducing Maptual. Maptual is an AI-powered customer data platform that integrates all your data. It's intuitive because it predicts your customer's journey and gives you actionable insights on healthcare professionals right at your fingertips. With just a few clicks, you can engage deeply with your customers, knowing the next best audience, channels, sequence of actions, and messages at the right time. Maptual is a one-of-a-kind self-serve platform that provides real-time feedback between sales, marketing, and analytics. This feedback loop results in smart segmentation and personalized recommendations to better deliver high-value information about physicians. With Maptual, you save time and ensure you communicate to them in a respectful and targeted way so that your therapeutics get to the patients that need it. Maptual, empowering pharma's next generation of engagement.
The pharma industry is changing faster than ever before. Organizations are facing challenges in today's landscape that are putting their top line and bottom line at risk. With new customer engagement needs and technology evolving at the speed of light, the need for agility is more important than ever. With over 15 years of healthcare experience, Impress delivers a wide range of best-in-class services that are specifically tailored to ensure our partners can adapt and excel in a rapidly changing market. We are experts at exceeding sales objectives and providing our partners with a significant competitive advantage. Whether the need is agility and speed, maximizing top and bottom line, introducing new skill sets, or risk mitigation, Impress stands ready to help. We are Canada's next generation commercial partner, and we are ideally positioned to continue to help our partners thrive in the months and years to come. To learn more, visit www.impress.com.
Okay, great. Well, we're going to get into the Q&A session, so I'll invite Brian, Ronnie, and Pat to activate their videos and come onto the screen with me. Great to see you all, and thanks again for spending time with us today. Really appreciate the insights that you brought forward in the presentations and the diversity of the topics today. And on that note, just a quick note to the attendees. We've seen some great feedback along the way here in the question and answer around how we're operating the NPC webinar. So thanks for that. This is the collaboration is well appreciated, and we'll have some answers to you on those as well. So to dive into some of the topics of conversation for today, I'll try to take it a little bit in order. And Pat, I promise I'm looking at my screen over here because I'm not doing my emails, but I'm looking at the Q&A questions. So I think we'll be okay. So Brian, I'm going to start with you today. We had a question that came in during your presentation. Were there any differences in HCP willingness for face-to-face engagement based on region or specialty that you've observed?
It's a great question. I think I'd start by saying that over the course of the last year, I've become a real believer in digital. And the way that we approach things here at Intercept was to recognize that we were entering a period of change, and whatever we did today is likely going to be something that pays itself forward in terms of the investments that can complement the work of our team. And at the same time, we realized that our approach to digital is that we want digital to actually complement the salesperson or the MSL and not to replace that. So what we have seen is a remarkable amount of receptivity on behalf of all of our physicians. I don't think there's any geographic difference in terms of receptivity, West Coast, Central Canada to East and Atlantic Canada. At the same time, that receptivity has demonstrated the fact that it's been pretty effective. And so for us, we've been able to continue to reach physicians, reach patients, grow our business, and ensure that that was, I think, a big part of how we wanted to represent ourselves to the marketplace, but how physicians want to continue communicating with us as a company. So no differences geographically, and really quite impressed with how effective digital has been.
Yeah, very cool.
Ben, can I add to that? So my
Pat,
observation, and my observation would be similar to what Brian's just shared. So I would say regionally, no difference, but definitely individual differences. So I think what we've noticed is the customers really appreciate choice. They've got families at home, they're working just like everybody else. We're seeing a lot of people want to do things off hours. They like doing, education in the evenings. I've got some of my reps that they're being asked to call physicians in the evenings for Zoom calls because that's, the kids are put to bed. So I think technology is allowing flexibility, it's allowing choice. And so it's not so much regional, but there's definitely some segments that are starting to appear.
Yeah, that's great feedback. And Ronnie, any points to add from your perspective on just how you're seeing that that kind of engagement level?
Yeah, I agree with Brian and Pat's comments. In fact, even dealing with my own GP, I think he's at his cottage more often these days than he is in Oakville. And he seems to be enjoying it. I mean, it's given them a new lease of life and a new freedom. So we have to adapt to that. We have to be very, very conscious of what the customer needs and wants are and adapt to it. And I think we will have to adapt.
Yeah, that's great. And it's actually a great springboard into the second question that popped up. It was directed to you, Brian, but Ronnie, maybe I'll let you start off with it. Brian talked about there being a bit of a renaissance of for the rep, but the question was, is it really now the era of the MSL? And are reps becoming less relevant in the concept of things?
Well, I think the key here, Ben, is title. I think a representative in the older terminology is done. I think the days of us trying to get features and benefits across the customers is done. And I think we have to work in partnership. So whatever the customer and the patient is required to do, we have to provide a service and add value. And however you terminology, the job title, it's about relationship with customer. And I think we'll have to get closer as an industry. And for example, I think the best, if you call a car garage, you're talking to someone immediately, the response is flexible, you're in contact with a human being. We can't live in this environment now of saying, no, I'm sorry, doctor, I can't answer that question because of the governance and the guidelines. I have to refer it to a medical colleague. Oh, come on. So we have to provide a service that's instantaneous and professional right there. And that means that the abilities and the skills and the framework and the guidance model will have to change.
Yeah, great points. Before I go to Brian, Pat, you want to take a run at that as well?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting perspective, and I don't disagree. I do think that there's some texture to it, though. I just look at different therapeutic areas that we're involved in, and the customers have different expectations and different needs by therapeutic area. So I think Ronnie's correct, but I think there's more texture across the different audiences, and then companies will have to decide, what does that audience expect and what are their needs, and adjust accordingly.
Yeah, I think there's an opportunity. I think you both hit it on the head there. It's about the customer's needs and what is the way that we can be more flexible to meet those needs. And so, over time, we've built these silos around commercial and medical, and over time, the role of the rep has been reduced. And there's nothing in the food and drug regulations that say that we have to do it this way. And so, I've made notion of the rep, but really it could be a different named person who's customer facing, but ultimately is equipped and empowered to deliver value across the spectrum of what companies are offering customers.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. And, Brian, just along those same lines, you spoke a little bit to kind of building on those non-traditional insights as part of your presentation. I think there was some interest from the attendees in terms of being able to elaborate on kind of what do you see as being kind of the non-traditional insights that help support us down that thought process?
Yeah, and I think this is really evolving. I think the first thing is, beyond sales versus plan and maybe even a new patient enrollment into a PSP, which is probably still the nearest term indicator that we have in industry. We haven't done a great job in understanding some of the earlier changes in behavior that give rise to patients access to drugs sooner. So I think it's still a work in progress. But for me, the digital world has been surprising in a number of ways. I think the first thing is that, like I mentioned earlier, very surprised by the receptivity and the effectiveness of digital. And so even if you think about a face-to-face call compared to a remote call, all the research that I've seen says that remote calls last longer. And in fact, they're just as effective, if not more effective than a face-to-face call. So I think that there's an interchangeability there. So for me, the whole question about measurement comes down to, are we able to capture the customer's attention, but also, maintain that customer's attention? To Pat's point earlier, customers have always had choice, but in today's day and age, they have even more choice. I think that whoever is delivering the best content, the most flexible way that meets their needs is going to win the day. So it will likely evolve, but over time, I think it'll land in a place that looks more along the lines of how do we measure the totality of engagement, the consistency of engagement from company to company.
Yeah, that's great insight. And, I think as we spring forward into that, and as I'm kind of going through some of the questions, there's some themes kind of rising out of the dialogue too. And as we think about, the working model of the organization in Canada, all three of you brought some fascinating perspectives on how areas are going to be influencing that organizational model. And a couple of questions that are coming out from kind of the dialogue here is, Ronnie, when you think about what you spoke about in the improvement of relations and the willingness to engage and the spark of innovation that's happening at an industry and a government level, what are some of the things that we need to take forward to think about organizationally to sustain that and really make sure that, and I'll turn it to Pat secondly, in terms of bringing it grassroots to the human factor and how do we live it?
I think the key thing here, Ben, is partnership, that we speak about it, but we only do it at a peripheral level. And it's really up to government and the healthcare givers in the industry to get around the table together. And we've fought hard to be accepted as a partner in Canada and other jurisdictions over the world over the years. If we're going to bring true innovation and we're going to add value, we have to understand the problems deeply. And that's to be accepted to sit at that table. So you look at the UK and the way they approach the whole vaccine issue. This was a holy trinity of government, academia, and industry trying to resolve a problem, which was create the AstraZeneca vaccine, and they did that superbly quickly. And I've already got the population more or less vaccinated, which is a wonderful achievement. And I think this has changed the view of the industry and what it can mean. And if you listen to some of the experts in that country, there's more of an acceptance that we should be sitting at the table, and be that at the government national level, be it regional, be it hospital. I think this is what we truly have to look to do going forward.
Very good. Pat, do you want to throw your 2 cents at that as well?
Yeah, it goes back to, I think, something Brian said in his presentation, which is the adoption of new innovation and new therapies. And I think he was hinting at the fact that it should happen quickly because these are great innovations. And so you have to ask yourself, what does government, who are essentially the payers, perceive of our products? And unfortunately, we're seen as a cost center. They don't see us as adding that much value. So I think there's a gap between the perception of the value of a healthy workforce and a healthy population and the downstream costs that are saved, because they see it as a line item. It's an expense. And Ronnie and the team at IMC have just done a wonderful job in starting to shift that thinking. And I do think that's the shift that has to happen, that government needs to see that there's a partnership, that there's value in having a healthy population, and it pays off in the long term rather. But at the same time, if companies come forward and they do have truly innovative products, in the perfect system, the government would say to themselves, this is a game changer. It's going to save money, it's going to improve productivity, it's going to be good for our population, let's just adopt it, as opposed to the system we have now where it takes years to get the drug approved, and then once it's approved to get it paid for. That could all change if that perspective was just flipped on its head. So it's an interesting model.
Yeah. Ben, there's been a number of examples where I think when government and industry come together with the needs of the patient in mind, good things can happen and they can happen quickly. So whether that was the enablement of telehealth and billing codes across provinces, is that a reality, or how do we work in partnership to maintain the supply chain for continuity of therapy, because we had that early surge of gap in supply chain for a few days. But the one thing that surprised and impressed me the most with Canadians is that, through COVID, there's been this elevated expectation of, I want the best therapies and I want them soon. And I think that's been an important dynamic of the pricing discussions of the years. But what is that choice that Canadians are willing to make? And quite clear, there's an expectation for the best therapies.
Yeah.
A good example, actually, Ben, is this Alzheimer's drug, which Biogen have brought to the market. Here's a situation where the FDA panel basically advised against it, but there's a sense that there's a value to this product. Now, I'm not getting into the pricing strategy or argument there, but here's a willingness to probably take a rolling regulatory view in terms of how the drug will perform over time in the real world. And I think we need to look forward to more real world evidence being utilized and then pricing being leveled against that. If it works better, then maybe we can get a higher price. If it doesn't perform as well, then a lower price, or maybe even taken off the market or pushed down the armamentarium of drugs that are used in that indication. I think there's a brave new world out there that we should embrace and look forward to.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ronnie. Yeah, it's great points. And Pat, any kind of final thoughts on that question? I don't know. I'll move over.
I think I'm supportive of what Ronnie says, because true innovation would be rewarded in that sense, right? Which is hopefully what we're bringing to the table. And if we're not bringing true innovation, then shame on us, and we probably shouldn't do that anyway. So I think that is the model for the future.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And I'll start with you, Pat, on this one. Maybe a bit of a combination of two questions that seem to have similar themes. So one being, what are some of the markers that we should be looking for, and the kind of the triggers of what we need to watch out for to do just what we're talking about? Like what are some of the things that people should keep their eyes wide open for as we move forward? And that may be translating into the go-to-market mix and how we do field force, reps, MSLs, or remote engagement initiatives, or even just in general in terms of how we present ourselves as pharma organizations to the health system. And then this part two of that question is, how do HCPs provide feedback into that, and how does that integration point happen with the organization? Is it a point-to-point type situation? Is it a multiple point-to-one point situation? How is that starting to translate for you?
Well, that's a great question. It all comes down to the basics of, we have one thing in common with the healthcare professionals, and that is, the patient outcomes, the patient journey, improving patient quality of life. And so as long as we always remember that, I think, that's the basis of this whole thing. Our interaction with healthcare professionals is definitely going to change. We've talked about the flexibility in terms of how they want to be communicated to. But I also think that physicians and other healthcare professionals need to get involved in rising the importance to other stakeholders such as government. They have a voice, but it's not as loudly heard. And it's only through a unified voice with pharma and medicine, so industry and medicine working together in the interest of the patient, that I think these things will start to move. And we are a little fractured, I think. Although we have common interests, we're not unified, we're a little fractured. So I think that will change. Right now, our interface on a company basis is largely with individual physicians. We do have some groups that we interact with, and organizations we interact with, but I think that common voice would be very powerful to government if we could achieve it.
Yeah, that's fair. And Ronnie, any thoughts from your perspective on how that's kind of the working parts of that interface look like going forward?
Yeah, it's the first time I've ever said this, but I agree with Pat. I think that ultimately the patient should be at the center of everything we do. And we've always been held at arm's length away from patients, but in a world of drugs for rare diseases, we really have to get closer. Patients should be part of, drug review boards. They should be part of hospital boards. They need to be heard. And it was quite embarrassing, the pronouncements from PMPRB recently and the the detective work that found out that we're trying to develop a communication program to actually accuse patient groups of being the voice of the pharmaceutical industry was embarrassing, because they are independent, they are lobbying to do their best in their best interests. Yes, we have to partner, but they're not become the lobbying voice of us as an industry at all. Everyone should be around the table. The patient should be the center of everything we do. We bring innovation and try and improve lives and save lives. That is our remit as an industry, and that's what we need to do in the future.
Thanks for that, Ronnie.
Yeah,
Brian.
I think there are different perspectives on value, and I think that the patient voice has been a perspective that's been underappreciated over the course of time. So, it's certainly evolved from I need this drug and I want this drug to much more coordinated groups that are generating evidence that demonstrates the patient's essential of value on a number of different levels. And I think that it would be unfortunate for us to not, consider that, but value the opinion of the patient as part of the model.
Yeah, wonderful. And I think the, as we get some of the other questions that are rolling in, and we just have about a minute left, so I'll maybe try to create a bit of a theme out of the conversation here. So I think some of the interest here is how do we embrace, and where are people from your perspective in terms of where we are at embracing the new environment as we've been talking about. And as we think about the speed of how business and the expectations of things have slowed down during the pandemic, although you spoke well, Pat, to the fact that we're almost working more. How is that going to translate, as we think about taking care of our people and working in the industry going forward? So maybe Pat, I'll start with you on that one.
Yeah, you saw the stats that I presented. I think that we need to be very sensitive that a lot of our employees are going to come back, either suffering from anxiety and depression. If they're not clinical, it's certainly going to be they're stressed out. It's been a tough time, especially people with young kids who have been doing homeschooling and things like that. So I think we just have to be very sensitive to it. Give people some time and some space. It's a world where in our industry, we treat these patients, so we certainly have to be aware of what they're going through and just give them support. So I think, as I said at the end, be kind, be human. This is our human capital, and I think it's really important that we show a lot of empathy for what they're going through. Personally, we're planning on some transitional things to help employees through it, because although I don't see anybody individually that, this is going to be trouble, I predict that there's going to be people that are going to have a tough time with it. And so, we're trying to do a lot of transitional stuff to actually ease back in, as opposed to, well, COVID's over, I guess it's back to work. So we're going to try to transition through it. That's what I would advise anybody to do.
Yeah, fair enough. Brian, I'm going to go to you for a moment, and then Ronnie, I'll give you the final word.
Yeah, second time I've agreed with Pat. I think we have to be very, very considerate of our staff. We will certainly adopt different strategies. There will be essentially 3 different ways of working: work from home, work in the campus in a hybrid way, so home and campus, or remote location. We call it agnostic location. And I think we solve a problem, which is Canadians who want to live in the East Coast or want to live in Alberta or the West Coast can actually develop their career within Canada, and even now develop a global career and still be based in Canada because of technology. So I think that's one way of resolving ambition. It doesn't help solve the depression and the exhaustion part, but I think we need to be very, very conscious that people require vacation. And this working style of 24/7 in front of a screen is certainly, it depletes resources. There's no question of that. And we'll be looking at the vacation and time off, and even considering things like work Fridays, no meetings on a Friday, and do nothing meetings. We're actually putting in diaries, do nothing meetings, which is fine for the GM and the CEO, but not normally the rest of the staff. So to try and introduce things like that, just to release the stress and release the strain. This is important.
Wonderful, thanks. Brian, final words for you.
And we're consistent. I think we recognize that the environment is changing. When we came into this, we told our employees 3 things. One is the first priority is the well-being of yourself and your families. I think the second thing is to demonstrate the right level of respect and respectfulness to people in the healthcare system, obviously. And third is just maintain a sense of focus around continuity of care for patients. So for us, that doesn't change, even though we're going to be transitioning to post-COVID. So if you're an office-based employees, we are carving off Mondays and Fridays as your day that time you see fit. And then we're building more collaborative focus time Tuesdays to Thursdays. It doesn't mean that you're going to have chalk block meeting time, but Pat's point, you need the richness of communication, the richness of collaboration. Let's focus on that time to do that. And of course, we'll evolve. I think the importance of people is paramount. And to Ronnie's point, the ability now of a virtual environment to create career pathing opportunities for us to benefit from contributions of people that probably would have been impossible a year ago are really important considerations that will make part of our organization going forward.
Yeah, very good. Wonderful. Well, listen, sincere thanks, and thanks for your time and your generosity, spending time with us today, sharing your insights and your experience. A real treat for the attendees today, and thanks again to the attendees for all the questions. So, Mitch, I'll turn it over to you and let you run at the close.
Sounds good. So Brian, Pat, Ronnie, Ben, gentlemen, thank you for those insights. Today, we all witnessed Ronnie agreeing with Pat, not once, but twice, which I think is a well-known prophecy of end times. The lions are laying down with the lambs, and who can tell which is which. I have some housekeeping tasks, as Ben mentioned. If you had questions that didn't get answered, send them to the NPC podcast with Peter Brenders and the NPC Health Biz Weekly e-newsletter. Shoot them over to health@chronicle.org. The conversation will continue. Stay in touch with us through the NPC website at pharmacongress.info. Very soon, we're going to have a date and a venue for the 15th Annual National Pharma Congress, which will be coming this fall in one form or another. Will it once again be live and in person at the Mississauga Convention Center, or will it continue as a virtual event in 2021? We're asking Zoltar, and he's promised to get back to us. But if you delegates have thoughts, please let us know at health@chronicle.org, and keep your fingers crossed. Watch for details soon. In closing, I want to thank the co-organizers of this caper, Pangaea Consultants, Ben and Joe. Special thanks to our team at Chronicle Companies, Alan, John, Kylie, Catherine, Darren, Jeremy, Aria, Kathy, and Christella. We're honored to be associated with the very best pharma partners in the country. They are 3H Communications and Miriam Hara, Emreach and Dave Bard, Yuri and his great team at Chronicle. Hi, Yuri. Yuri and his great team at healthing.ca, Imprez with Will and Tiana, Odea, Orchid, Philip and Helen and group, Jen and Rich at Peak Pharma Solutions, Pharma Consultants Inc. and their affiliates led by the legendary James Cran, and finally Talk Communications and our old friend Arno. So that is the show. Thank you very much for spending some time with us again today. Stay in touch, and we'll see you again soon.